Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. This is going to be a quick uh, notes about arrays in Java. We're going to talk about kind of related to what we discussed last week. The first thing I want to talk about is basically when you define an array, as we discussed, the name of the array is going to be a reference, which means that the name of the array will hold the address in which the array resides in memory. So if you actually try to print the array name, basically the content are not going to be print. You're going to get that address again in which that array is referenced at. So let's look into an example. Imagine I have an integer array called nums that's storing some numbers. So 1, 2, 3. If I do sout nums and I'm getting an error, so I have an extra comma, here is actually the address, but that's again it's you know uh, I cannot this way print the content of the array, so you need like a for loop as we discussed last time and things like that in order to print the array content. Now let's actually do kind of like array assignment. So imagine I have another array, integer array called clone, and that's gonna be nums. So basically now let's see what happens when I do sout clone, and let's see the result that we get. Notice we get exactly the same output because now this is just gonna point to the same content that nums is pointing to. So basically the address held by nums and the clone is exactly the same address. And we kind of touched on this last time when we talked about methods and passing arrays to methods. Remember the call by reference? And that's exactly the same thing because now the reference for clone is just going to be the same reference for nums. Okay, so this is one thing I wanted to touch about. Now, the other thing I also want to talk about is what happens if I really want to print the content of the array. Okay, so basically we looked into using for loop to display the content. There is also another way you could print the content of the array, and that's something the way we would be able to use this is through a method called toString. So the toString method is going to actually print the string representation of the array, not the reference for the array. So the way you do this is you would need arrays class dot toString, and notice toString basically it can take so many different arguments. And essentially if you look at this is actually the one like exactly similar to our case. It takes an integer array a and it returns a string representation. That's why it's called toString, because it returns the string representation of the array. So now my array name is nums. So now when I actually run this, you can see 1, 2, and 3 actually return. Now notice when you define an array, you define it with a curly brace, but with the toString method, it actually prints the array with square brackets. Okay, that's how the toString actually works. In fact, so many different programming languages, they use the square bracket in order to define arrays. Java uses curly braces, okay? So that's one thing I wanted to touch about. Um, Now, obviously, without the need to say, this doesn't really allow you to do much with arrays because for instance, like if you want to calculate the average, minimum, maximum on an array with the toString method, you cannot really do that. It's just like a quick way to display the array content. Finally, we looked into for loop to display the content of the array. So for now, like if I say int I is 0, I is less than nums.length, I plus plus, that's how we did last time. So now if I do sout nums of index I, So basically we'll be able to see the content of the array printed out. There is actually a shortcut for displaying the content of the array and using like second version of a for loop. So the way this for loop looks like, and it only works for arrays, okay? So just, keep that in mind. So basically this is, like, let me actually type that out and then I'll explain it. So in temp nums and then as out temp. So this actually version of a for loop, it's actually, like a quick way to display the content of the array, because normally like it's, like the developer job to figure out, like what's the length of the array, or you have to pretty much do this multiple times. In this version, all the heavy lifting is done for you. So all what you need to do is just a basic for loop, and then basically you will have, some kind of like an argument here, and then colon another argument. So the first argument is kind of like a temporary variable, and essentially the second argument is the array name. So now the for loop is going to iterate over your array elements one by one, and then for every array element it's just going to be assigned to, this variable here, temp. So now I'm actually printing temp. Okay, notice again, this is an integer array, that's why my temp is an integer. So if you actually define another array, like a double array, let's call it nums d for double, put some values like 1.5, 1.2, and then 9.99. Now if I want to print the content of this array, it's just going to be for double d, for instance, and then nums underscore d s out d. And let me put like a separator here in the middle. So now if I run this, you will be able to see I printed 1, 2, 3, which is actually this one, and then for the second one, basically using this notation. So the nice thing about this version of a for loop is that you don't have to worry about, kind of like nums.length. It's just gonna automatically figure out the length and then print each element. And again, it applies to any array of any data type. Okay, so our next video is just going to be about two-dimensional arrays, and I think that's going to be the last video I'll have for you for this class. Okay, so see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.